Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. I'm the Chancellor of this great university. My name is Jonathan Cornish. And at this University of Calgary, located in the heart of southern Alberta, we both acknowledge and pay tribute to the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7, including the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Good Stoney First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. The University of Calgary is situated on land northwest of where the Bow River meets the Elbow River, a site traditionally known as Mokahinsis to the Blackfoot, Wisinspa to the Stoney Nakoda, and Gutsinsi to the Tsuut'ina. On this land and in this place, we strive to learn together, to walk together, and to grow together in a good way. Thank you for joining me this evening. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the University of Calgary, the 15th annual Lecture of a Lifetime. Let's start off. Let's get the room warmed up a little bit. Let's give a round of applause to having a full room tonight. Right? And while we can be loud with our claps, I would remind everybody to kindly turn off their ringers on their phones, just so we can have it nice and quiet to hear our great speaker tonight. Following tonight's lecture, there will be audience questions. But first, let's talk about what the Lecture of a Lifetime is. This was launched back in 2008. The University Senate wanted to recognize our community's accomplishments in teaching, research, collaboration, and the lifetime's worth of wisdom. The idea for a lecture series was inspired by an inspirational talk by Dr. Randy Pausch, a professor at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, that he gave in 2007. Only a month after doctors told him he had less than 6 months to live because he had pancreatic cancer, Dr. Pausch presented a lecture in a packed auditorium called Really Achieving Your Childhood Dreams. He talked about trying to achieve his own childhood dreams that included becoming a professional football player, which I know something about, experiencing zero gravity, and developing Disney World attractions. It was a deeply moving and often funny talk. He shared insights of finding good in other people, working hard to overcome obstacles, and living generously. The Lecture of a Lifetime series at the University of Calgary reflects that very same desire to recognize personal and career achievements. It's a way for our illustrious community to come together and celebrate our own inspiring stories. And tonight, we're going to hear from an inspiring individual who many would call a mentor, a leader, and especially an innovator. He's an award-winning UCalgary researcher, a veterinarian, and a professor of molecular genetics in both the Faculty of Medicine and the Cummings School of Medicine. I wonder if any of your patients knew you worked on cows. Of course, I'm talking about Dr. Jay Cross. I'm so thrilled that he is here tonight with us to share his story. I'm also pleased to welcome a few of our honored guests this evening. We have Chancellor Emerita Joanne Cuthbertson. There she is. Well, we have your name on the seat up here, Joanne. And we have Mark Herman is in the crowd. He's all the way back. Put your hand up, Mark. There he is. Your name's on the seat up here, too. We have Ian Minifee, President and Chair of the UCalgary Alumni Association. Thank you. Thank you, Ian, for sitting in your seat. And members of our University of Calgary Board of Governors, our Alumni Board of Directors, and Senate. Go ahead, stand up and be recognized. You get some applause, too. Where are you at? Stand up. Stand up. Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, events like this are not easy to put together. And when you have a group of volunteers dedicating their time and efforts to make things like this come together, those are reasons why this is one of the greatest universities in the world. Welcome to our members of the university's senior leadership team and members of the Student Union and Graduate Students Association. Where you at? Go, give me a wave. There we go. You can clap for them. And a very special welcome to Dr. Cross's family, including his mother, Shan. There she is, who's here with us this evening, as well as the entire two front rows here and those rows there. Let's give his friends and family and colleagues a big round of applause. Dr. Cross informed me that tonight is a night for him about telling the people that we'll be talking about for the next 20 years what he did for the previous 60 years. And that's why he brought all his friends and family out tonight. I'd like to acknowledge our past lecturers for their continued support for the Lecture of a Lifetime series. And it's truly an honor. This is my very first Lecture of a Lifetime. But in hearing the history of this, like Sam Weiss last year, and obviously Dr. Cross this year, illustrious speakers, incredible people sharing their stories, and really showing these incredible things that are happening right here at the university. I'd also like to welcome all the students, faculty, staff, alumni, and all of our valued community partners and leaders who join us tonight. It is now my pleasure to introduce the President and Vice Chancellor of the University of Calgary, Dr. Ed McCauley. Oh, I get to give you a bio for once. As internationally recognized scholar, a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, and a former Tier 1 Canada Research Chair, Ed is passionate about advancing education and research with a transformational social impact. And I'm going off script here. People around the world come to see Ed. He was in Singapore. People from all of Asia came to see him. He goes to Europe. People from all of Europe go to see him. Ed is and has been one of the greatest leaders at the University of Calgary. And he is the head of our family here as a professor and most recently, Vice President Research. But he, to me, is an inspiration. So let's all welcome President Ed McCauley.
Thanks, John. Really, really appreciate the introduction. And it's really great to be here. And again, Chancellor Emeritus Cuthbertson, it's great to see you twice in a week, which is absolutely fantastic. Members of the Board of Governors, current and former senators, as well as members of the Alumni Association. Ian, you're actually sitting in the seat that was assigned to you. Ian's the only person that has done that, which I'm really, really impressed. I had a formal speech, but Jay is a colleague and a friend, so I tore it up. What I'd like to do is to present sort of three topics or three vignettes to develop a common theme. And it really is about the notion of starting something. When I was Vice President of Research, I introduced a new model for Associate Vice Presidents that involved attracting research superstars who had been there, done that, and who, when they walked into a room, their colleagues at the University of Calgary and across the country would go, wow, there's a leader. There's somebody that's very inspirational. To inspire excellence among our colleagues, rather than having Associate Vice President of Research who are primarily focused on administrative services. I wanted scholars who had built major networks, who were superstars in the area to inspire the university to reach higher heights, to take big challenges, and to play on the national and global stage. Jay was the first person I approached, and very, very fortunate that he took up the role of Associate Vice President in September 2011, after I'd come back from California in July 2011. And he took up that role to lead major institution-wide research initiatives. In approximately 2 years that Jay was in that role, he helped establish our institution's major research strategies, and other universities across the country have recognized that the great advances that the University of Calgary have made, leaping up and vaulting up in the standings, the league tables, if you will, across Canada and around the world, is because of how we built those research strategic themes. They provided the opportunity for our colleagues to come together and take on some very, very big, important, grand challenges. And Jay was there at the start. 3 years ago, we were the first university in Canada to name child health and wellness as a pan-institutional research priority. Yeah. And only last week was a very, very historic day, truly historic, where we received the single largest research grant ever, and I think it might be the largest research grant in the province of Alberta ever, $125 million from the federal government, which, thanks to the partners with the Alberta Children's Hospital Research Institute, will grow to around $268 million, all for our new One Child, Every Child initiative. This is a very sad statistic, but Canada ranks 30th out of 38 in the wealthiest countries in the world by the OECD in terms of child health. And this initiative will change that. Over 130 partners from across Canada and 25 countries around the world. We're going to do what great research universities have always done. Look at the world and we will make it better. That project is led by Susan Benzler and Michael Hart. Susan Benzler is the current director of the Alberta Children's Hospital Research Institute. And Michael Hart, of course, is our Vice Provost of Indigenous Engagement, as well as a professor in social work. Guess what? Jay was the founding director of the Alberta Children's Hospital Research Institute. Jay was there at the start. Let's turn to veterinary medicine. We are the youngest faculty of veterinary medicine in Canada, but we're also ranked among the top 50 veterinary schools worldwide. Last year, its role in supporting Alberta's critical cattle industry was recognized by a provincial investment of $59 million, which will help us expand enrollment by 100 spaces. We have the WA ranches west of town where students can learn on a 19,000-acre living laboratory. Jay was the founding Associate Dean of Research and Grad Studies in veterinary medicine. Jay was there at the start. I hope you recognize the common theme. A person who is inspirational. A person that possesses academic excellence and what I used to call street cred. A person who recognizes that the big challenges in the world often require expertise that's beyond your own discipline, and to be able to be humble and listen to your colleagues from those different disciplines to see what sort of solution you come up with. A person who can take risks. At the start, these were all ventures. They were all experiments that were being done. And Jay was right there at the start. And I really cannot wait to hear what he says tonight, because I know it will be inspirational. And I know we'll all be driving home going, wow, that was a lecture of a lifetime. But before we do, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Saskia de Jong. And Saskia is Saskia, apologies. She's a fourth-year veterinary medicine student who met Dr. Cross in 2020 and worked with him in the faculty's Cultural Task Force group. Saskia, over to you.
Kinanas Gomatin, President Macaulay. Thank you. How do you top that? I'd like to say, Nowakamakinak Egwa Niktotemdik, or greetings, my relatives and my friends. It is my pleasure to be here with you this evening. I grew up on a reserve in far northern Ontario, in a community that had significantly more bears than it did people. Not lying, in fact, there's actually probably close to 5 times the number of people in this room than there were in the village where I grew up. I studied at Dalhousie University in Nova Scotia and then went on to pursue more academia at James Cook University in Australia before returning to Calgary in 2015. Unlike many veterinary medicine students that had aspirations or dreams of becoming a veterinarian from a very young age, I unfortunately didn't even know what a veterinarian was until I was a teenager. So initially I had intended to pursue a career in veterinary medicine, but my background and my upbringing with animals ultimately led me to a career in veterinary medicine. In my youth, I learned about the importance of the human-animal bond, and I realized that I could have a profound impact on the communities like the one from which I came by helping the animals, which in turn could help their people. I met Dr. Cross as a second-year student at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine here at the University of Calgary. At that time, our learning had largely been turned online due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and I joined the faculty's Cultural Task Force, which was a group that was designed to assess the culture within our faculty as it related to faculty, staff, and students. Dr. Cross was then one of the co-chairs, and he played a huge role in leading the group forward and just overall team morale. His calmness, his kindness, and his willingness to listen to those around him made him incredibly approachable, especially for the students that he worked with. As already mentioned, Dr. Cross is an internationally recognized scholar in both the human and the animal health realm, as well as a leader and an innovator who has pioneered many programs and signature initiatives here at the University of Calgary. He was born and raised on a ranch in southern Alberta, but left for 20 years to pursue an education in science, and of course, in veterinary medicine. This is before starting his academic career at the University of Toronto. Like many of us, the call of the mountains and also the prairies brought him back to Western Canada in the year 2000, where he took on a series of leadership roles, including becoming the founding director of the Alberta Children's Hospital Research Institute, the founding Associate Dean of Research and Graduate Education in the then new Faculty of Veterinary Medicine. He was also the Associate Vice President Research, and finally, as founding director of the College of Discovery, Creativity, and Innovation at the Taylor Institute for Teaching and Learning. In recognition for his leadership and his scholarship, Dr. Cross was recognized as a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. In 2021, he was elected president of the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences, and he is the first professor from the University of Calgary, as well as the very first veterinarian to ever head this organization. Dr. Cross has also received honors for his contributions, including research initiatives at the University of Cambridge in the UK, as well as the Chinese Academy of Science in Beijing, China. Dr. Cross's colleagues, students, and friends will tell you that he has a keenness to learn about everything and everyone around him, as well as a drive to make the world a better place for all beings, whether that be the two-legged variety or the four-legged variety. So not only was it an honor for myself to work with Dr. Cross and the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine in what was probably the most challenging work either of us has done, it is a huge honor to be here this evening and to introduce Dr. Cross, or my friend Jay, to all of you. So with that, I'd like to say a quick thank you, and I would also like to invite you to please enjoy the following video featuring several of Jay's friends and colleagues.
I think sometimes what people don't know about Jay is that he really is truly a Renaissance man. He's an outstanding researcher. He is an incredible teacher.
He was relied upon for tackling the most complex issues that we had in the lab, whether that's just in our lab, in his field of expertise, or in the vet school, or in his work as a consultant, or in the cattle industry. He did other work with the Taylor Institute.
After achieving at the very highest level as a scientist, he sought opportunities in leadership, and then he has sought opportunities to further the lives of students through educational activities, and now he's more engaged with community endeavors that are outside the university. So he's in some ways a roving intellect that is always looking for new ways to make a difference.
To me, there is ego-driven people and outcome-driven people. And he certainly is an outcome-driven person who wants to effect change and always taking that step to think about it. What is the impact my actions have on my immediate surrounding, but also literally globally, that is something we can all learn from him.
What I really admire in Jay and Jay's approach to science is his clarity and great scientific insight. So when he publishes papers, they are interesting. They are never boring. Also, when he gives talks, they are interesting even for the people from outside the field.
I'm so looking forward to this lecture myself because he's extremely forward-thinking. To think outside the box, to think beyond today, to think what do we need tomorrow, I think that describes him very well.
Some of the key learnings that I've learned from Jay, definitely it's try first, it's be curious, stay curious, and consider what the opportunity is or consider what the possibility is in everything.
A career well lived is more about the people that you've influenced, the trainees that you've mentored, and others whose career you've furthered than it is about your own achievements. And I think that, and Jay embodies that, and that's the most important lesson I take from him.
In science, people try and simplify things to make it easier for people to understand. And what he said to me was, science is not simple. It is complex. You need to be able to embrace that complexity, and he likes being on the edge of the unknown, I guess.
Thank you all for being here. Chancellor Cornish, President Macaulay, Mother, Chancellor Emeritus Dinning, Chancellor Emeritus Cuthbertson, colleagues and friends, thank you so much for being here. I have the pleasure of telling you how I went from then to now, or from there, growing up on a farm with beef cattle, to being here on a stage in Calgary at this illustrious institution. And I would tell you a lie if I told you I knew exactly that I would be here somehow. So I'll tell you the journey along the way of how I got here. So my story begins when I was about 17 years of age, thinking about finishing high school and what I was going to do next. Would I go on to college or university? And so I did what's become common practice in lore. If you're advising somebody, you sort of think about what your passions are, and you think about what you're good at, and you think about what the world needs, and where those things intersect, that's what you focus on, and you'll be successful. So I did that as a 17-year-old. I was quite proud of what I came up with, and I sat down with my mother and father, and I told them I was going to be an outdoorsman, and I would spend my winters in the mountains and my summers in the north paddling, because people love their outdoors, and I loved it, and I was good at it. And it was the one and only time where my parents gave me advice by shaking their heads like this. And so my dream of being an outdoorsman died mid-grade 12. And so I came up with Plan B, and Plan B wasn't the end, but Plan B for me then was to focus on what I was good at and what I was interested in, what the world needed. And so I came up with, and I applied to McGill University, was accepted into the economics program, and I was going to take some political science because I was very interested in Quebec politics at the time, in 1980, post-referendum, and in history. My mother's mother always told me I should go into history. We love talking about history. And so that was my plan, age 18, heading off to leave Alberta to go discover the world on my own in downtown Montreal, in Quebec. And then something happened in the fall of 1980. In addition to signing up for my economics classes and political science, a last-minute decision, literally a last-minute decision, for my elective, I signed up to take Biology 100, taught by Dr. John Southern, along with 400 other students, first-year students at McGill University. And you can imagine the scene, thinking, okay, this is going to be drudgery, but I'll get it out of my system, and then I'll get back to economics and political science. And instead, Dr. John Southern changed my life. Science for me in high school was memorizing things, the carbon cycle and taxonomy of animals and stuff. It was boring. Whereas political science and economics, that was about people, that was about society, that was interesting. That's what drove me. John Southern made science human for me because he didn't just tell me what the science was, he talked about the discoveries and who had made those discoveries and the controversies at the time. And sometimes it took decades. Sometimes people needed to die before others in the field would actually believe them. And so suddenly science came to life for me. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it was to be a scientist. And I knew that the science had come to me in my interests in history and political science, et cetera. And so that changed my brain. And so I was looking for opportunities. And then a year later, taking a physiology class taught by Dr. Bruce Downey, who was a veterinarian, in addition to having a PhD, teaching in a university. At the end of one class, he said, anybody interested in doing research for the summer, please come and talk to me, because there's a studentship deadline coming up for NSERC, a national funding agency. And I was so naive, but naivety got me pretty far in life so far. I said, what's research? But I like this prof, so I went to talk to him because he was a nice guy, and he opened a door for me. And indeed, we talked for a little bit, and I was hooked, applied for the studentship, got the money, and the following summer in 1982 was my first research experience. And the rest is history, up until about 10 years ago. But get to that in a minute. So these two people, just as these little small acts, changed my life for the better, set me on in a completely different direction. And I'm forever grateful for their small contributions, their door-opening activities. So when I committed to the pathway of science, I had to choose what a field was. And to paraphrase this quote by Hugh Walpole, basically in science, if you want to get ahead, you choose one thing and be really, really good at it. You know, like the Dutch deciding they're going to grow tulips like nobody else in the world, right? And so I had to choose all the fields, and I was interested, growing up on a farm, as I was interested in reproduction of animals, you know, the biology of, you know, how it all happened, but also the complications of pregnancy and how reproduction was influenced by things like drought or flooding or changes in feed as a result of not availability of feeds. And so that was the field that I went into. Interestingly, I've worked with pigs and sheep and cows. I've even done a little bit on muskox reproduction at a molecular level. And I've worked in human hospitals where I've been focusing on human biology. And so probably for my family who are not scientists, that was a bit of a challenge to follow. You know, what is it Jay's doing now? And so to help, my mother developed a system where she had next to the telephone, back in the days where a phone was something attached to a wall, she had a cue card attached with a description, 2 sentences. So when one of her friends would call and say, oh, what's your sister Pam up to, or your daughter Pam up to? That was easy to explain. When it get to me, she would take the cue card down and say, well, Jay is working, he's doing artificial insemination in pigs, right? And then a year later, I would come back, and I would, at a Christmas party, I would explain what I was doing, and she would say, but I thought you were doing artificial insemination in pigs. And so she had to update this cue card. So, Mom, this is for you. I'm going to summarize 25 years in one slide for you. This is what I did. Okay, no more cue cards are necessary. So I was interested in reproduction, and specifically I became interested in how it is, after sperm and egg come together, that little embryo implants into the womb and starts to change the course of life for the woman, eventually the family as well. And I became an expert in placentas. Remember, you had to really focus in one little esoteric area. So, you know, when I'm trying to cross a border and they say, what do? I say I'm an expert in placentas. You know, everybody laughs. This is literally what I became an expert in. I know more about placentas than pretty well everybody else in this room, with the exception of maybe my colleagues where, oh yes, a couple of colleagues over there that I've trained, so they're up on it as well. So to summarize 25 years, I discovered a whole bunch of genes that determined how a placenta is established. I discovered the inherent ability of stem cells in the placenta to self-organize with any outside cues to form these beautiful vascular channels that welcome maternal blood in, carrying nutrients and oxygen to help the growth of the baby. We found out that these interesting spaces that maternal blood is flowing through are surrounded by hormone-producing cells. These hormone-producing cells have got a very unusual property in that they're extremely large, several hundred times the size of a normal cell. And so from that standpoint, they're biologically curious. And moreover, with now modern molecular genetics techniques where we can take single cells and know exactly what an individual cell, which genes is expressing, we found that the placenta produces over 100 different hormones during pregnancy. Okay? So some really interesting biology, I think. So we created these maps of how cells, developed, and a bunch of these are hormone-producing cells or endocrine cells. And so in the immortal words of Austin Powers, that great philosopher, but what does it all mean? So I'm going to tell you, Mom, what does it all mean? Because of this complexity and the vast range of hormones that are being produced, that are targeting different parts of the mother, the placenta is acting like a brain for pregnancy, influencing mother's behavior, including eating behavior, stimulates her bone marrow to make more blood cells. Incredible, incredible biology that gives us insights into treating lots of different diseases, not just understanding pregnancy. And in producing these hormones, it's sensing the environment, the health of the mother and the baby, and is acting in the interests of both. So in the face of adversity, such as malnutrition or stress, the placenta is able to adapt things to keep the mother and baby as healthy as possible. Profoundly interesting mechanism underlying the adaptability and resiliency of reproduction. And so that is the main theme of what I've done during my career. So when you choose an area, whether that's in life, or in science, the area that I chose, I think it's safe to say, in looking back, that I wasn't following a whole bunch of other people that were going to become molecular experts in what the placenta was. I was going in a completely different direction. And there was some risk associated with that. I thought it was a good idea. There was so much to answer. It was obviously important. At one time, we all needed a placenta to get here. And yet we sort of take it for granted. This idea that sort of swimming in a different direction, not just following the leader, was really enforced to me in 1995, about a year after I had started at the Research Institute at Mount Sinai Hospital. The director of the institute at the time, a renowned molecular biologist and leader in biomedical research, Alan Bernstein, took me out for lunch for my annual review. And by that time, I had written 3 grants and I had received all of them. I had hired people in my lab. Research was starting to come out, things like that. And so he started out the lunch meeting by saying, congratulations, like your start is as good as we've kind of ever seen. But then he said, when are you going to start thinking about doing something else other than this, placenta thing, like maybe cancer? Use your talents towards cancer or heart disease or whatever. Well, if you ever want me to do something, tell me to do the opposite, okay? And so I heard that, and I took it to heart. Couldn't sleep very well that night, and I woke up and just said, you know what? This is an important area, and I have to believe that it is, and I've got to start changing minds and bringing other people into the work. So the second lesson in life is don't be afraid to choose your own direction. Please don't ever do that. The third lesson came from somebody I worked with in San Francisco during the time I did a fellowship, Zena Werb. It's a wonderful, wonderful human being. And when I was working with her, she was so open to different areas of inquiry. And I kind of came to her very naively and just said, hey, I want to work on the placenta. And I made this really interesting discovery. I've discovered some genes. What do you think? And she said, of course, come on in. What excited Zena was answering big questions, not just little, really sort of focused things. And certainly in the area of the biology of pregnancy and how the placenta functions, there were lots of big questions. So her message was always focus on the big questions, leave the small questions to other people, and also be prepared to tell a good story. Use language that engages people, especially if you're kind of working in your own area. You want to bring other people in. And so with that advice, you don't have to be a rancher to know this is a bull and this is a cow. It's springtime about what's going to happen next, okay? So with this kind of in mind, you know, before I used to think of giving presentations where I would have the title of my talk, Physiological Adaptations to Pregnancy in Pigs, but instead the more robust Zena Werb-like thing would be, no, the consequences of sex. All right. I gave this title, used this title in a talk a few years ago, and the then Dean of Veterinary Medicine, Dr. Cribb, introduced me, and I got up and I said, I've revised the title of my talk to be The Consequences of Sex. Well, he blushed, and I got what I wanted in that. Or, in the area, I talked about these big giant cells that become, they over-replicate their DNA to become what's called polyploid. Instead of saying, you know, inhibition of polyploidy in an experimental mouse model disrupts pregnancy, you can say, how about something bigger really is better, okay? So that was great learnings from there. Now, with respect to the science I've done, and indeed the whole rest of my career, I would not be here at all were it not for an incredible team of people, hundreds of people, but the key ones are listed here. Team Placenta, all the people that I trained in Toronto and after I moved to Calgary in the year 2000, including Miriam Hemberger, who's sitting in the second row here, who trained with me, actually started in Toronto, and I said, we're moving to Calgary, and she was brave enough to come along. And then she was recruited back to Calgary just a few years ago, and we're honored to have you here. But so many different people have helped me, spurred me on, done the work that I get to take credit for. I'm incredibly honored to be up here representing all of you. And beyond my areas of science, things that I'm going to talk about now, other roles that I've taken on, whether that was the Alberta Children's Hospital Research Institute or other things on main campus, here's the list of people who really did the work. And I got to take credit when things went well, and if things didn't go well, they got to take the blame. Okay. So coming to Calgary, as I did in 2000, was a great environment to grow my own areas of science. But also, as I was here after a few years, I got to realize that across the whole campus, not just in the medical school, there were a huge number of people that were working in the areas of maternal and child health, early childhood development, in the faculties of medicine, eventually veterinary medicine as well, but also in the faculties of nursing, and in social work, and in kinesiology. And as I got to know these people, I began to think of this place in a very kind of different way. There was so much strength, but it had never really been brought together before. In many cases, people didn't know each other. And that was sort of my background when an act of gall happened. And that is an act of former Dean of Medicine, Grant Gall, who sadly passed away too early. And in the year 2003, the act of gall, Grant was a fearsome leader, extremely visionary, and he wanted something to happen. He'd get really red in his face and pound his fist, and he usually got what he wanted. And the way he created the health research institutes that we now know about was really almost overnight. And he pointed to certain people to say, Sam Weiss, Brain Institute, Paul Cubes, chronic disease. And he tapped me, this veterinarian who grew up on a ranch, to say, child health, go forth. And the great thing about Grant's leadership was that he understood his role as a great leader is to surround yourself with people that he trusts, to do the work, and then to get the heck out of the way. If there was an obstacle in your way that needed to be moved, scary Grant Gall would come forward and it would be gone. And so it was a really wonderful example of leadership, probably the best leader that I've ever seen in action. Now, the other thing that I learned from Grant is how to lead when you really don't have any power. Because at the beginning of ACRI, we didn't have a $125 million grant yet. We had nothing. It was, you know, a pat on the back from Grant saying, go forth. And at times, as frustrating as that was, like there wasn't a gift agreement with the Children's Hospital Foundation. There weren't partnerships between the faculties of nursing and social work and medicine and things like that. All those relationships needed to be brought together. It was hard work and scary work at times. But what I found is that the door is always open. When I would knock on a door, first time I went over to the old Children's Hospital and talked to the CEO of the Children's Hospital Foundation, Deborah Apps at the time, she opened her door. And heard this vision that I was trying to articulate. And sometimes when you don't really have any power over people, or you don't have a big pot of gold to say, hey, come and play, you've got all these resources to play with. You're just playing with ideas. And to get people to engage, of course, you got to use your ears more than your mouth and engage people in that way. And that's what began to happen. And it was a really powerful lesson as to how much you can accomplish when you really don't have any power at all. Because over time, what happens as your ideas get better and people buy in, that's the true measure of leadership. When people join in on your journey to say, we're going to climb this mountain together or ski up this mountain together, and they're inspired by that common vision, they want to join in and they bring their own heart, their own brains into it. And they choose to follow, not because they have to, because you have power of them, because they choose to be part of this journey. And that's what happened 2003, 2004, 2006. So much so that when you really provided that great leadership, if you're no longer there as the leader, it doesn't matter because the momentum is already there. And that's what happened with ACRI. And so here we are today. And as you heard from Dr. McCauley, last week, the culmination, not the culmination, the beginning, the next highest peak is the receipt of this enormous grant with co-funding totaling about $268 million. So congratulations, Susa. It's such wonderful news. We always knew that child health and development had tremendous strengths here, and now the rest of the world knows that too. And my last comment about leadership is when I read this quote after the announcement that Susa had made, and I highlighted this here, true leaders recognize that it's not just them standing on the stage, it's the teams that they bring together, hold together, and inspire. And your understanding of that leadership is what will propel ACRI even further and further and higher. So thank you, Susa. So after leaving ACRI, there was another new shiny thing. When you heard the introduction, sometimes I sort of think, people are gonna assume this guy just can't hold a job down. Either that, or he's a little bit distracted with the shiny new thing. And that's kind of, yes, that's partly true. I like new things, but I also know sometimes it's time to move on to inspire other people. So I moved from ACRI in becoming the founding associate dean of research and graduate education in the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine. Also the idea, the brainchild of Grant Gall. That was an incredible time when I started. We were 8 people sitting in one room, 3 admin assistants and 5 faculty members, and it grew up to be one of the leading vet schools in Canada and in the top 50 in the world because you inspired people to join, you gave them space and resources, trusted them to do their job. And that continues today under the tremendous leadership of Dr. Renata Weller. And Renata's father is ill and I'm not able to be here. And so Amy Warren, an associate dean, you're here representing the faculty. Thank you so much and for the work that you do. So after leaving Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, Dr. McCauley attracted me to come onto main campus and become an associate vice president of research. And I got to work on 2 really interesting things, which were supportive of the university striving towards its goal of being a top 5 university in Canada. One was co-chairing a committee that looked at understanding what are the league tables internationally and what data goes into that and how can we improve? What's some low-hanging fruit that could we do? And then I also co-chaired an activity looking at administrative things. This is not very visionary, but at the time in the university, there was a lot of impediment for people being able to get their work done, to get research accounts set up and to hire people, and the frustration levels were very high. And the work needed to be done of just acknowledging that and rolling up some sleeves and get people talking. And so it was really enjoyable work, and I would have continued beyond my 2 years of doing that. Something happened to me. But at the time, the pathway that I was on of these positions, this position here, I was looking ahead 5, 10 years to say, am I going to be a dean, a vice president, a provost, a president? That's where my thinking was. That was the pathway I was on. And I think I might have been not so bad at some of those jobs. But then something happened to me in 2012. And in 2012, and Dr. McCauley, you were front row seat to see this, my health deteriorated in a spectacular way. I had been in good health many years, little aches and pains of getting older, the decades started turning over. But my body erupted, my immune system erupted and started turning against me. I was dealing with incredible pain in my musculoskeletal system, muscle stiffness, it was hard to walk. I was tired all the time. I would sleep and I'd still wake up fatigued. And my brain was foggy. The thing I'd relied on that had gotten me that far in life was no longer there. I couldn't trust it anymore to do things. And I had developed allergies. I had asthma, very severe allergies. In fact, I developed allergies to the very things that were on the ranch: cattle and horses and dogs and cats. And not surprisingly, depression came along with it. And I've started to talk about this more. Mental health is something that's more and more, as part of our public discourse. This hit me hard. It was hard on me. Before I had a diagnosis. It was almost 3 years before I had a diagnosis. And that's record time, actually. I read a report the other day that some people with the same condition that I've got, it's taken them 11 years to get a diagnosis of living with pain and stiffness and brain fog. So imagine the effect that it has on their lives, the lives of their children and their loved ones. And to help me came some new things for me, starting a course of immune suppressing drugs. I started to meditate to deal with the pain and stiffness and not being able to sleep. Not being a pot smoker ever before, I took the leap, started using cannabis because it helped with pain and helped me sleeping. And I took up yoga. So suddenly there are these things that I couldn't do. I couldn't hang around cows. In fact, I developed some food intolerance as well. I couldn't eat beef. So I'm a rancher who can't be around cows or horses. It's really painful to sit on a horse, and you're not eating beef anymore. So I took off my cowboy hat, stopped thinking of myself as a cowboy, and instead I became, a pot-smoking yogi. So that was a big transition. That was a big transition for me. But beyond just dealing with the day-to-day things, I realized in having a chronic condition that my life, I wasn't just going to get better. Not like I broke my leg and I'd be back to normal. My life was different. The pathway that I had been on to become a university president or provost or whatever, that dream was over. I needed to really rethink what I was going to be doing with my career, with my life. And so I started to think of myself in a more relaxed kind of way. And so I'm going to take my tie off for that. As a result, just give me a minute. So here I am. The road I was on washed out completely. Got to rethink this. Initially, really hard. What was I thinking? My world was defined by the things I couldn't do. I can't be a scientist anymore because I can't count on my brain in the same way. I certainly couldn't travel in the way that I had been, jetting all around the world giving lectures. Leadership roles, being a president with what I've got? Yeah, I don't think so. And so I had to rethink things. And it was a pretty dark period from the fall of 2012 to early 2013. And then sometimes things fall into place. And for me, things fell into place on June 13th, 2013. I was home on sick leave, still in my pajamas. My kids were about to come home, get off the school bus and walk in the door. My kids were in middle school at the time. And turned on the news, and the lead story of the day was that day, people had declared that the global population was 7 billion people. And moreover, by the year 2050, there would be 9 billion people in the world. And all of the people that were interviewed for that news story, was about gloom and doom. You think we're screwed now? Just wait till the year 2050 was the message. And it didn't matter who they were talking to. And who they were talking to tended to be people that look like I do now. Gray-haired, often white. And so listening to this made me a little bit uncomfortable. And my kids walked in the door and a light bulb came on. Because sometimes when you hear the news about a gloom and doom futuristic story, it's so far from the future, you think, well, okay, I'll be dead and my grandkids will be dead by then as well. The year 2050, my children would be my current age at the time. And I would be the age of my father, and my father would be dead. All right? And so suddenly it was sort of lining up. I didn't want my kids listening to the news or reading the news stories. They needed to hear something positive. So that was the first thing that went through my mind. That the people that would be running the world in the year 2050 were not only born, they were in our schools. And what were we doing in schools? Were we giving them the right message? And then this is the second thing that came to mind. And I thought about my own childhood. When I left when I was 18 to go to university, I said goodbye. I don't need my parents anymore, that generation. I know better than that. And I assume my kids thought the same thing at the time. And so it occurred to me that if we were really facing these big global challenges in the world, maybe we needed to be talking to or giving the microphone to the most creative people on the planet, and that is our children. That isn't our children until we send them to school and start restricting their thinking and telling them, no, don't be creative. You just got to learn stuff first before you can apply it. So this was going through my mind. And in thinking about our schools, particularly the transition from high school to post-secondary, of course, our institutions are greatly proud of it. But we've got all these wonderful programs at university, and we say to a student, hey, you want to come to University of Calgary or McGill? What do you want to take? You got to choose one. You can't choose all of it. You got to choose one. And so we're facing these complex global challenges that require science and political science and humanities sort of thinking, and yet we train people in separate ways. And once you get into a program, you say you're going to take this course, was a prerequisite for that course, and that course, so you really can't cross over. It's only authorized personnel only. If you've taken those prereqs, oh, come and take my course, all right? And then there are big barriers to switching fields. If you want to switch fields, like I did, it was okay. I switched in my first semester. Imagine you get 3 years into your program, you want to switch fields? Well, we can't really count those course credits yet. So there are barriers to do that. And so I call it the curse of specialization. And so I really profoundly was sort of thinking, I went from being troubled about the messages to our young people about what the world was going to look like in the year 2050, and I began to think around solutions. What could we do? What could we do differently about that? And then I started reading. And I've discovered this many times. Just when you think you've got a novel idea, you read somebody else has written it. Sir Ken Robinson, in a TED Talk, talked about, given our certain world, we need different modes of intelligence to reward different modes of intelligence. And we need to create relationships across disciplines. And we weren't doing that in schools. We were doing the opposite. We were saying, choose one, but not all in that way. And so I began to sort of think about a pathway, about how I might be able to do it, but I realized I'm uniquely unqualified to do anything about this. I don't have a PhD in education, anything like that, but this conviction in me, this strong pull was so strong, I thought, I don't care anymore. I've faced my demons with the pain I'm dealing with, etc. I'm going to use what energy I've got to something that feels instinctively important to do. And just when I sort of thought, I can't do this, I'm not trained to do this, imposter syndrome kind of thing, I reflected on things that I heard from this man, Fraser Mustard, who was a giant in the area of early childhood development. And he influenced governments around the world to make a difference in making investments in early childhood development. He was trained as a physician, and his research area was kidney disease, the physiology of the kidney. And yet, I only found out about much more recently, and I thought, well, yeah, but you're the child development advocate. You're so effective in your communication with, you're influencing governments, and yet you're a kidney doctor? How is that possible? And he would tell me often that your credentials don't define who you are, ignore them. And so he inspired me to say, okay, I know this is, I'm going into a new area, but if he could do it, maybe I could too. And the other thing he taught me was he was incredibly persistent. He didn't take no for an answer. And if he couldn't get a yes out of somebody, he would find friends who would get a yes answer out of that. And he did so with incredible charm. And so that combination of persistence and charm can change minds. So with that sort of inspiration, I went off and I convinced a local school, Strathcona and Tweedsmuir School, independent school, and they found 3 other schools to create a program, an experimental program called the 2050 Project, which we brought students, challenged them to come up with an innovation to address what the world is going to look like in the year 2050. Very broad, open thing. They got inspired by this idea because they got to come to Banff to present their ideas at a summit in Banff. They thought, cool, we get to go to Banff. But we tricked them into learning because they realized they were going to have to be presenting in front of other people and interacting with mentors in the audience. And so then they got to get serious. And they defined what they needed to learn to make their project better. It wasn't us telling them what to do and then saying, oh, design a project. And about the same, it was about a year later, after I was involved in the 2050 project, that the College of Discovery, Creativity, and Innovation was created as part of the strategic plan, and I became the inaugural director of that. And inspired by that experience in the 2050 project, we took that in terms of the courses, only open to first-year students from any program in the university. So we had nurses next to engineers thinking about the world in the year 2050. It was incredibly inspirational kind of work to do. Because what we were getting, we weren't stuffing knowledge into their heads, we were giving them the opportunity to think about the world and to exercise these different types of thinking, working in teams to understand what it was to collaborate, the benefits of that, to think about things in terms of worldviews. It was incredible to watch what these naive first-year students would do, especially when we connected them with people in the community, because the students were so excited to be learning from somebody who wasn't their prof. And the people in the community were so excited because they understood what was going on in the university, and they loved these young minds who were so eager to do. So it was really wonderful relationship building. And what I learned from this is, in terms of kind of the ingredients, what worked in those 2 programs? By giving a broad scope of a project, saying, think about the world in 2050, come up with something to make that world look better, or to take advantage of the circumstances in that. It was an authentic experience because this is real world, and you're working with people in the community, be they artists or business people, or wherever. We didn't just let them come up with ideas and kind of go with it. We forced them to do critical thinking about where did their views come from, where did their ideas come from. And so they came at it through the lens of really critical inquiry and discussion amongst their team and discussion with their mentors in the community. And when they presented their ideas, that wasn't the end, and we didn't choose winners and losers in the end, because what I found is whenever you give a pitch to an audience, you learn something immediately by looking at the reaction of the audience. And so if you give them time, you built in time for students to reflect on what did they learn, how to make it better. Even a few days later, what they come back with is much more inspired, and they're committed to the path. And the teachers are playing a role as guides. They're not the ones in the room giving them information and then dismissing the students to eventually work on a project. They're, right from day one, we're saying, come up with a project. And so it inspired teachers, and I had many, many teachers tell me they remembered why they became a teacher in the first place. So an incredibly inspirational kind of experience. Of course, in Calgary, we're blessed in having many, many educational institutions. And this is from a document put together by an initiative called Learning City, of which the University of Calgary is a partner, but also Mount Royal and SAIT, and many other educational institutions. And what I found really interesting is that there are over 3,000 learning organizations just here in the city of Calgary, all doing incredible things. We're doing incredible things here at the University of Calgary, but when you look at that broader landscape, it's some really amazing things. And I just want to highlight 2 things. Somebody I got to know on the University Senate, Raheem Sajid, works for the Calgary Board of Education. And I always sort of had this view the Calgary Board of Education was sort of narrow and standard, but CBE has a pathway called Discovering Choices, where students can pick their pathways and how they learn So it's a very innovative sort of program. And then the other one I want to highlight here is a very new program launching this fall, organized by Strathcona-Tweedsmuir School, the partner in the 2050 project. And they're starting a school called STAND, or Strathcona-Tweedsmuir and it's a hybrid way of learning. A lot of the content, the lecture stuff is all online for asynchronous learning. And the face-to-face learning happens on Wednesdays through project-based learning, where students will be working on projects at Platform Calgary, so downtown Calgary, so in a real-world environment, working with people in the community, business people or artists on projects. And I know for a fact that as those students embark on those projects, that will sharpen their keenness as to what they want to learn from their discipline-based courses. So these are really wonderful examples that are out there. As an educator, we're at this really interesting time to see what's emerging out. So based on my journey so far, you probably understand where the title of my presentation came from. And I came across this word, this Old English word, cottywomple, a few years ago, and I said, that's me. You know, I feel like I've got some purpose, but I still don't know exactly where I'm going. But that's okay. I feel really comfortable in those shoes at the moment. And so that takes me to this lesson, which is knowing when it's time to leave. Having had experiences, both incredible experiences within the university and also outside the university, I began to ask the question, should I still be in the university or not? And I asked myself the question of all these positions I've had at the university, and I once aspired to be a president or a vice president or a provost, whether it was here or somewhere else. And I asked myself, do you still feel that way that you did 10 years ago? And the answer to me was no. Those things didn't thrill me anymore. It wasn't an aspiration anymore. And instead, I felt the things that were giving me purpose and excitement were things outside the university. And so I last year chose to take early retirement from the University of Calgary, not retired at all, probably busier than I ever been. And the time was right, because I didn't need to be on this, I didn't need to be here anymore, because the next generation of people were already here at the university, whether it's you, Sousa, as director, or Miriam in terms of your area of science, or Saskia as a student we heard from earlier. I'm so inspired with where you've come in your career. You need to be on this stage, not somebody that looks like me, gray-haired white guy. Our time is over. So I began to think, well, okay, all this coddly-wompling around, like what's the damn theme here? Are you just chasing shiny things? And when I began to think about it in the dark days of my illness, I realized that there are three main themes that were resonating through me. One I've already talked about, this notion of resiliency of pregnancy, but also resiliency as an individual dealing with adversity or illness, or resiliency as a society after an earthquake or a flood. And so that was one area. Knowing more about resiliency, could we capture that to make the world a better place? The second major theme was related to what I've already talked about in terms of inspiring and enabling young people. And in some cases, that's not just teaching you, but rather clearing the space and then saying, Saskia, it's your turn. I've created the space, and if there's any hecklers out there, I'll shut them down, because it's your time, or it's time for my son or my daughter to do the speaking, not me anymore. And the third resonant theme, having worked in different institutions, trying to put an interdisciplinary institute together, et cetera, is reflecting on the fact that many times we can't make progress in society because there are barriers that exist, either in society or within our institutions. And so understanding what those barriers are and why it's a holdback to people became something that was important to me. And in thinking about that, that's when I said, I still can continue this work, but outside of the university. And I want to just highlight two of the things that I'm doing now, one of which is referred to already, is I'm the president, proud to be the president of the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences, which is an organization composed of physicians and nurses and veterinarians and social workers and health economists, all leaders in their fields, all named as fellows, elected by their peers. And we have a purpose other than just giving out pins and saying, hey, congratulations, you're a new fellow of the Academy. We have a purpose, which is to improve the health of Canadians, animals, humans, ecosystems that are here. And with that, we just finalized a strategic plan, and I just highlight a few things that are in here. In that strategic plan, we recognize it is our responsibility, it's not as our goal, it is our responsibility in advising to improve on the health of Canadians. We need to think about the most vulnerable people that live in this country. We need to recognize that racism and inequality in healthcare exists. And we need to start by acknowledging that, by saying that out loud, and to do something about that. We recognize that it's a backdrop. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission established many recommendations, calls to action, many in the areas of health that have not been acted on. So we as an advisory group can do something about it. And just very recently in March, we published a report that was solicited by Health Canada, looking at the state of Canada's health human resources, which is very, very stretched, as you can appreciate if you have to navigate the healthcare system. It was stretched before COVID, and COVID only made things worse. And so we made, in this report, I was not directly involved in this, but I'm extremely proud of their work. In terms of the priority pathways, the first is focusing on the health of Indigenous people by enabling and training Indigenous healthcare learners and practitioners. The second, another vulnerable population, is people that live in rural and remote regions. And as you read down here, also focusing on the health of systematically disadvantaged people within this country. So this is a signal to me. If you told me 10 years ago, Jay, you're a veterinarian that's worked in the lab for most of your life, and you're going to be in an organization like this, I would have laughed. This is the strange pathway. This is the coddly-wompling that is my life. But this is incredibly important and meaningful work. I don't have the lived experience, but I can create the space, and I can use the words of inequality, racism, and things need to change as an organization. The second thing I'm involved with is a passion play with a former classmate of mine from veterinary school called the McEachran Institute, where we're focused on the future of animal health, but also people and ecosystems in it, thinking about the world as it is now with climate change, changing expectations on where food comes from, the use of antibiotics, et cetera. So this is hard work to do sometimes, especially when you're talking about inequality and racism. It's hard to do. But with practice, it gets easier. And I think that this quote, "Discomfort is the price of admission for a meaningful life," says it exactly as I feel it. So when I think back in my journey, I think about these 5 people that have influenced me in such an amazing way, opened doors for me that I didn't even know existed. I'm so grateful for them. What they did to me, they helped so many other people as well. Those are large, large shoes to fill. And when I started to ask myself, they've all died now. Who is going to fill their shoes? And then the answer came to me. I filled their shoes. And importantly, people that I've interacted and doors I've opened for them are now part of my network. And living in a world where we're connecting and helping each other makes me optimistic for our future. Thank you very much.
Incredible, eh? No, thank you for putting on your jacket.
Welcome back.
So that was quite the lifetime you've led. Thank you. I have a few questions of my own. We'll be taking questions from the audience momentarily. I would like to welcome Chancellor Emerit Deb Yedlin. She's somewhere in the crowd. Yeah, there she is. Let's give her a big round of applause. And we also have Chancellor Emeritus Jim Denny in the crowd as well. Let's give him a round of applause. I took a few notes. I mean, a few pages, but it's all good. So you're the first professor I've heard that had a classic stoner thought. Why do we have to focus on just one subject at university? We should learn everything, man. But things are changing.
They are changing.
I'm sitting here, youngest chancellor in North American history. So I have some pre-prepared questions and stuff, but I always like to do things pretty dynamically. And I hope this question doesn't offend anybody. I'm sorry, Ed. So when I hear about placenta, I hear about influencing behavior. And then I think back to sort of the stereotypical, pregnant person asking about peanut butter or pickles, ice cream. Is that the placenta saying that I need specific nutrients of some kind?
Yeah, I think it is. One of the remarkable things in many pregnancies, and I'm not a woman, I've never been pregnant, but I've observed a few. I remember when my wife got pregnant with my son. Weeks before we knew she was pregnant, she came home from work, grumpy, and said, I'm going to bed, I'm really tired, and said, what's that stink? And it was like, there's nothing, there's no dead mice, there's nothing rotting in the countertop. And they said, her sense of smell has changed. Boing. And interestingly, that change in the brain, specifically in the part of the brain responsible for smell, is something that changes very early on. And I don't know how much science has been done on it, but I think it really is related to the initially around food choices, what's good for you. And then later on, that change in sense of smell is important in terms of bonding after birth. That sense of smell that a mother and a newborn is a way of connecting together. And so from an evolutionary standpoint, that's a really important change that needs to occur in our brains, in a woman's brain.
And sort of along the same lines, I mean, you spend a lot of time on ranches, working with cattle, horses, and then all of a sudden, your body starts reacting negatively to it. Would there be something like that your body would pick up something along, okay, maybe you've had enough of this. Maybe it's time to, like, you ever thought along those lines, especially if you're stoned?
I have thought about it when I'm using, I don't smoke because I got asthma. So I'm an oil user here. So just full disclosure here. But you can take a certain amount of oil and feel pretty good. For me, that change, the development of those allergies came on very suddenly. It wasn't something that sort of, I don't feel really very good around that. It was something, it was sort of like night and day for me. And it was very dramatic being around in the springtime. You're around cows and calves and you're vaccinating them and things like that. And there's dust everywhere. And that was work that I just literally couldn't do anymore. Even taking medications. So I was told, go away, get like 50 feet away. And so I would watch this happening from 50 feet away.
Now, what I'll do now is invite people to the microphones to ask your questions. And we heard a lot about what you had done in life. Mm-hmm. What's next for Dr. Cross?
I've never been, on the one hand, slightly terrified what I'm going to be doing next, but also really comfortable in kind of where I am. My health it will always be up and down, to the end of my days. It's not a disease that goes away. And when I have a setback, I just need to accept that, and not feel desperate or not worried. Am I going to be able to come back? I'm going to come back in my own way, not in a way where I was 20 years ago, writing papers and flying around. And it was very curious that didn't matter to me anymore in the same way. The reward wasn't there anymore. So the two things I'm working on, the Canadian Academy and the McEachern Institute, those are my areas of focus now. But I'm always open to new things and challenges. And if it involves seeing young people, creating environments for young people to succeed, seize the opportunity that lies ahead, I'm in.
Beautiful, beautiful. Hey, I'm going to keep asking questions, ladies and gentlemen, because nobody's lined up. You can line up at there we go. There's one, there's two. Okay. But too slow because I have a microphone attached to my chest. So when it comes to, I'm always interested in overcoming obstacles. You talked about meditation, yoga. What would you say maybe are the key things that helped you overcome sort of this incredible transition you had to make in your life once you faced illness?
Yeah, it was the support of a lot of people around me. I alluded to it. You know, when somebody gets as sick as I was, it's really hard on your loved ones and friends. Your work colleagues don't necessarily understand. And I also, in dealing with the depression, I went to counseling, and it's something that I still do now, and I'm proud to say it. 10 years ago, I would not have had the courage to say it. I would have not had the courage to say, you know, I can't do that anymore. But it is important to talk about it, to allow other people to tell their stories. I'm not unique in any way. I don't want anybody to feel sorry for me, because I'm as happy as I've maybe ever been, you know, in my life. Everybody's journeys has hurdles and twists and turns in it, and something unexpected you have in your career. So keep going, understand that you're not alone. And there are people out there, you know, to help, whether that's through counseling or support groups, and lean on your loved ones. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you might not know, but I made my whole career in avoiding obstacles and over top, underneath. And now, one of the also things, you know, we have our loved ones, but when you pay somebody to listen to you, you know, there's generally good outcomes associated with that. Let's go with a question we have on the left over here.
Sure, thank you so much. I really appreciated what you were saying, and I think when you talked about the importance of bringing a human face to science, it really emphasized the importance of interdisciplinary learning. But I feel like now in universities, we're all in programs. I'm studying political science in the Faculty of Arts, like you started at McGill, but the programs are very much structured around a certain discipline or a certain area. So I guess, how do you think that universities can sort of bridge the divide between these different areas and make their programs more interdisciplinary?
Yeah. It's not just the University of Calgary that talks about this. I think every institution probably across this country in the US talks about it. I mean, it's hard to do because we've invested so much in our programs. And as new information has come along, programs you know, have maybe split apart to subspecializations of engineering, et cetera. I'm really pleased that interdisciplinarity has been made a priority of this university, and I think that's going to be a recommitment. I'm looking to President McCauley about that. And I had a meeting a few weeks ago with the Dean of Graduate Studies, Dr. Robin Yates. We're developing graduate programs which are interdisciplinary in nature. And there have been some failures in the past around programs like this, but the language that I'm hearing, I think I'm optimistic that it'll be different this time. It requires, you know, changing resources. Right? Faculties used to be, and programs used to have sort of all the resources. If you can have something that cuts across disciplines, so your budgeting process differently, your culture has to be different as well. So it's not a simple thing to say and do, but I think it's so incredibly important to do that and to put value on people that have the ability to cut across disciplines, to speak two languages, because those bridge type people are key to teams and are key to our society. So thank you for the question.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you.
And I'd just like to recognize Asha. She is one of our Chancellor Scholars here, one of our greatest students at the university. Let's give Asha a round of applause. But I really appreciate the work that's being done towards interdisciplinary programs here. I, in fact, have a Bachelor's of General Studies at the University of Kansas. You know, they let us do sort of design our own program. But the real question is will a dean be okay with cutting their budget? So let's go with the next question over here.
Superb talk, Dr. Cross. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We heard earlier today about Canada ranking 30th out of 38 in child and maternal health, I think was the grouping, and that's really sad. But Canada has the problem of so much rural area, the Indigenous out in the rural area. How can we battle the distances that Canada has? We already have that, of course, with our energy consumption. How can we deal with that with the kind of the rural nature of our country to make maternal and child health better?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And if you really want the longer version of the answer, I would encourage you to go to the report that I referred to, just published by the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences. Beyond just identifying sort of an urgent need to address health, not just in children, but across the lifespan in rural and remote areas, the report identifies or puts forward recommendations on how to approach this, including embracing team-based approaches to learning. So rather than thinking about every community needs to have an orthopedic surgeon and this kind of a specialist, et cetera, thinking about sort of primary frontline care supported by specialists that are in other areas, connected through telemedicine or through Zoom, and having appointments whereby instead of having the patient fly into a major center to see a specialist, those specialists are in turn going to those rural communities where the care will happen better because those patients are surrounded by their families. And so it's in no way a simple thing to do, but the geography of Canada and the challenges of distance and how to keep healthcare workers in close at hand in those rural communities is a real challenge. But I think we need to...
It's interesting. I just read a paper today and it's saying exactly what you said. People are as happy with virtual care as they are going to their doctor's office, and those of us that are docs are disappointed with that.
Yeah, I know.
We always thought it was us, but in fact it's the care they get, and so that's probably going to open some doors. Thanks.
Yep, thank you.
I, for one, look forward to our new AI doctors. Next question.
Fantastic presentation, Dr. Cross. That was really, just lovely to see. You painted a really nice picture when you're describing your mom having the cue cards to kind of explain, what you were doing in research. And often in science, it's quite difficult, right, to communicate very specific subjects to the public. So I was wondering if you could comment on like the importance of scientific communication and kind of where you see things could be improved for like public communications of scientific ideas and research, that kind of thing.
Okay, wonderful. Nick, is that you?
It is.
Nick was one of the brave students who took the course as part of the College of Discovery, Creativity, and Innovation. And you were a great example. So, and I also remember Nick, his other great connection is his father, David Cram, was on an advisory council for the college that we called the Jedi Council. For anybody in the know, if you're on the Jedi Council, that was a pretty cool club to be part of. So yeah, back to your question. So being able to communicate science to lay people, I think, is incredibly important. And it's something we don't practice enough when we're in the midst of our special programs. We started a graduate program in the veterinary school, stressing the importance of sort of lay communication. And we piloted the 3-minute thesis, which now the whole university is embraced. And Tara Christie, that started that with me, is now in the faculty of graduate studies doing that. So taking advantage of opportunities like the 3-minute thesis, where you boil down, 5 years worth of work, into 3 minutes in lay language, that is a really important skill to do. And so I think it needs to be built into all programs. It shouldn't be just an add-on, like, yeah, you've got this great program, hey, do you want to be in the 3-minute thesis competition? I think it should be embedded deeply into things. And also, too, I probably didn't practice just telling my mother and my sisters, every day, or when I would call home every couple of weeks to tell them what I was doing in that language, so they didn't need to lean on a cue card. So, sorry, Mom, we're not picking on you. We love you very much. Yeah. So,
thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
And I think we have time for one more question. Sorry. And?
Hi. I've been dealing with chronic illness the last few years, and I was curious if you had any advice in kind of finding the balance between pushing forward with what you want to be doing and where you want to be going, and kind of stepping back and allowing yourself to rest and kind of recover.
Yeah, it's something that takes a credible amount of practice to learn to, because I had lived this privileged life where my brain could take me to places, and I learned to communicate, could convince people, to join along, And suddenly those things were sort of taken away. And it was not easy. I kind of skipped over the fact it was a dark period, and I went to counseling, etc. It was a lot of soul searching and practice, and a lot of setbacks as well. Times when you think, I'm feeling pretty good, and I can go do this. Maybe I can take that trip, and then suddenly, you kind of hit the wall. So accepting that about yourself, you're still the same person inside as you were before. If anything, it has made me, in all the soul searching that I've had to do, I think it's made me a better human being. The other piece of advice is, I've sort of talked about it in a general way, is to lean on people who care about you, but also reach out to people that are also dealing with chronic illness as well. And I never thought I'd be doing yoga, taking marijuana. I certainly never thought I'd be going part of a support group for the condition that I've got. But all those things collectively have helped me enormously. So good luck on your journey.
Thank you.
What a wonderful evening, and thank you very much for sort of presenting tonight. I think this is, like I said, my first lecture of a lifetime, 15th that we've had. And would you all agree that this is maybe one of the best ones we've ever had? Right? So a thank you to all the audience members with questions tonight. I'd also like to take the time to recognize the tremendous work that all the Senate Community Engagement Committee did in selecting this wonderful speaker, and thank you all for coming out tonight. Jay, on behalf of the Office of the Chancellor and the Senate, we would like to present you with something.
Thank you.
To express our gratitude and appreciation for your time. And so within there's a donation to the Latent Arts Center in your name. That's not bad, eh?
Thank you.
So everybody put their hands up if they learned something tonight. Okay, everybody stand up if you learned 2 things tonight. And once again, everybody put their hands together for Dr. Jay Cross.